Hi, this is Sam Antonio with Liberty News Network. I'm here at LPAC in Reno, Nevada, and I have here in the booth with Liberty News Network, Doug Wead. He is a presidential advisor. He's also a senior advisor for the Ron Paul for President campaign. So I'm so glad you can join us here in the booth.
Thanks, Sam. Good to see you.
Now you're speaking here shortly, but I'm glad that you can stop by the booth because we have a couple of questions for you. Now, as a senior advisor for Ron Paul, talk about the stuff that you do in advising Congressman Paul. You were talking about coalitions and organizing that.
Yeah, my direct day-to-day duties are coalitions, but I've been a part of 7 presidential campaigns over the years, and 3 of those won, got into the White House. So my input covers the whole thing.
Good. Now, as you said, you're pretty well experienced with presidential campaigns. What makes this campaign so unique? I know with Ron Paul, one thing I've seen, I have been involved in other presidential campaigns, not as involved as you, but I just see the grassroots movement in this campaign as far unique as anything I've ever seen before. Is that what you've experienced here with Ron Paul?
Absolutely. I've been a part of many presidential campaigns, but this is my first revolution. And the activist base is just amazing. I was part of the Reagan campaign and wrote the Reagan campaign biography, and he's a very wonderful man and had many wonderful visits and interviews with him over the years. And his was an ideological movement, but nothing compared to this. This has an activist base. Most of the other campaigns, your support depends on your viability. In this campaign, the support comes from your ideas and the power of your ideas. So you have that unchanging base. It's very, very interesting to be a part of this.
Now, I like what you said, that this campaign is based on ideas and people are motivated by that. With your experience, again, working with this campaign with Ron Paul, is there something that you see that's vastly unique about this in regards to young people being involved? We saw that in 2008, the amount of young people being involved in a presidential election campaign. And as we well know, that demographic of young people, 18 to 25, don't go out and vote. How have you seen it now with this campaign of the youth involvement?
Yeah, very strong youth involvement. I think they've got the most at stake in this election. We've had a real, earlier I referred to it as a revolution. I really believe that we've already had a revolution, that our form of government has almost changed.
Sure.
And we're the counter-revolutionaries. We're trying to bring it back to some common sense things like a balanced budget and less government intrusion. And I think we're the real traditionalists going back. But we've had some dramatic changes, and young people see that and know that. They're going to have to live with it. My wife is French, and we were talking the other day. She said, when François Mitterrand ran for president of France, he ran on a platform of nationalizing the banks, and it was greatly debated all across France, and he won, and he was elected as the socialist president of France, and there was no shame in that. He was a socialist, François Mitterrand. But when George W. Bush nationalized the banks, he's called a conservative Republican, and we call that a bailout. Well, I think young people are maybe a little bit ahead of even the national media in understanding what's happened in America, and we've had a dramatic change in the Bush administration and the Obama administration that has taken us as far to the left economically as we have ever been in this country, or close to where we've ever been.
Now, in 2008, Ron Paul opened up a lot of people's eyes, and in particular people who were not involved in the political arena at all. Now, here we are again. He's running in 2011. What do you see it's different in this campaign? Obviously, one thing that's different is that Congressman Paul has announced he's not running for re-election for his House seat. But what do you see different in this campaign?
The biggest difference to me is the marketplace of attitudes and ideas. When he ran last time, 74% of the American people didn't know what the Federal Reserve was.
True, yes.
Now 74% want it audited, and even the insider elitists are now accepting the fact that, oops, our little piggy bank, that those days are over, and he has really changed America, whether he wins or loses. The discourse has changed, and those people who've been living off this largesse of loans and easy digital money from the Federal Reserve are going to have to find another way to do this, because the public is catching on. That's the biggest difference.
Now, as a presidential historian and also as a New York Times bestselling author, let me ask you a two-part question. What are the keys to a successful presidential candidacy? And then second, what are the keys to a successful presidency? You know, you studied the presidents and you've seen what works and what doesn't work.
Well, the keys to a successful candidacy are money, money, and money. And Ron Paul has some money, enough. I would say that this next money bomb coming up, whenever it is more important than many of the straw polls and the other high-profile events that we participate in, because the national media is not going to give Ron Paul a break. Many of those companies are beneficiaries of these gigantic loans from the Federal Reserve, and they're not especially anxious to help along his message. So he's going to have to do what Ronald Reagan did. A lot of young people don't remember, but Ronald Reagan was called by the national media a racist and a warmonger and all of these things. But he won, and he won because he went directly to the people with his own advertising. And we have already tested when Ron Paul goes directly to the public with his own advertising, where he controls what he's saying, and it doesn't go through this medium where it can be distorted. He really moves the numbers, and that's his best opportunity to shock the nation, win the nomination, and win the presidency. So it's going to take money to buy television advertising, to go direct to the people.
And what are the keys, would you say, for a successful presidency? You talked about Ronald Reagan, served 2 terms, one of the most popular presidents in the White House. So what do you see? What makes a successful president? We
haven't had many successful presidents. We've had the last 10 or 8 presidents, only 4 have been reelected. Of the 4 that were reelected, 1 was impeached, 1 resigned in disgrace, and 1 left office with the highest negatives in his last month of office of any president since they've been polling positives and negatives of presidents, having brought us into the 2nd worst economic depression in our history. So only 1 president of these last 8 or 10 left with any degree of dignity, and that was Reagan. And I suppose the qualities are the qualities that Ron Paul has. He's honest, incorruptible, and he believes in something, believes in the Constitution, and that's what would guide him as a president and make his presidency successful.
Referring back to that, we were talking about movements, and again, referring to Reagan, I look at the conservative movement, the freedom movement, and I look at people that were led by personas or strong personalities, namely Barry Goldwater in '64, Ronald Reagan in 1980, and now we have here Ron Paul. Now, Ron Paul, again, he's announced he's not going to run for re-election for his House seat. And in the event he does not win the presidency, Ron Paul everyone looks at him as the leader of this movement. Once he's off that national scene, will this movement survive without him? Who do you see, or what will happen without that? And do you see any successors to Ron Paul? I think one of them's obvious, but what's your opinion?
Yeah, I think that this movement, you asked earlier, why is it different this time? And one of the reasons it's different this time is because people have a hope and they have a future. And they know that even if they aren't completely successful this time around, and we hope we will be, but even if we aren't, there's Rand Paul. And he has been raised in this family. He's aware of these issues, these liberty issues that people like myself are just newcomers to. I feel like such a student just learning and feel foolish not having seen and been aware of these things. But Rand has been steeped in them. So you vote for Ron Paul, you get Rand too.
So speaking of Rand, do you think we're going to see a future presidential run from Rand Paul?
I think so, because I think that, again, it's the marketplace, it's these numbers. It's just, I saw parts of it when I worked in the White House, in the George Herbert Walker Bush White House. I would see a company come to the president, a hamburger company. They'd come to the White House and they'd say, we need $300 million. And we'd say, why do we need to be giving you $300 million? Well, because we're producing hamburgers in France. We're competing against the French government that's subsidizing the hamburger industry in France because they don't like American culture. So we need to be on an even keel, and unless you can get us free trade, you have to subsidize us. And so here's the federal government giving hundreds of millions of dollars to a hamburger company. And then I just see in this partial audit of the Federal Reserve, thanks to Ron Paul, just recently, I saw that same company was given several $100 million from the Federal Reserve, in addition to what it gets from the federal government, and the US Congress gives it. Now, if you're a young couple and you want to open a hamburger joint, let's say you're an African American and you want a piece of the American pie, and you and your wife and your families all invest their money, you mortgage your house, you buy a little store and you start your hamburger joint, you're loaded down with federal regulations on purpose to keep you out, because the name of the game is monopoly, and those big companies don't want competition. So you've got all these regulations against you that you can't afford, and you're paying your taxes to subsidize your competition, giving them hundreds of millions of dollars to compete with you. And then on top of that, we just discovered, thanks to Ron Paul, your competitors getting several $100 million more as stimulus money. So the American dream has been corrupted by the process, and it's wrong, and it's immoral, and it hurts the poor the most. And our money has been diluted and devalued, and every time the Federal Reserve pumps out this money, we learned it was $16 trillion. Well, the national debt's $14 trillion. I think back to Glenn Beck, those TV shows where he's walking around his studio and he's showing how high the bar goes and how great these debts have grown. And, and the Federal Reserve pumped that much money in 1 year into the marketplace. It's tragic. And they asked Ron Paul a question in the last debate, you know, about a young man, if he didn't have health insurance and if he died, what would you do? As I was listening to that, I was thinking of the scenes of those people in Kenya who are starving to death, those babies who are coming in their parents from Somalia into Kenya to try to get food. And there's an example of the Federal Reserve dumping all that money on the market, driving up the price of wheat just a tiny bit, pushes hundreds of thousands of people over the edge, poverty edge, and leads to starvation. It is a corrupt process, and it is being exposed by Ron Paul.
Yes, and we need that. And again, I think it's a great fortune for this country that we have the congressman running, talking about these issues, talking about the ideas, and bringing it forefront to the American public. One more last question before we conclude this. I'd like to pick your brain as an expert and someone who's studied the presidencies here of our great country. Who would you consider who would you consider the best president that has served in the White House?
George Washington.
I think that seems unanimous for a lot of people.
Well, you know, he walked away from power. And it's more complicated than that. Life is. But he set the precedent. We could be in a lot worse shape than we are if he hadn't have said no to the crown.
Very true.
And wish others had said no.
Well, Douglas, thank you so much for stopping by the booth at Liberty News Network.
Thank you.
This is Sam Antonio at LPAC here in Reno, Nevada, signing off.